Is it gonna focus? Yeah. Okay. Hi friends, if you're like me, you're screaming inside all the time. Doesn't stop. Or you're a photographer that wants to talk about editing and shooting dance pictures and reception photos. If that sounds like you, we should talk. So legitimately nervous about it, but I am back to shooting some dance parties. Most of the examples that I have for you today were pulled from last year because I haven't shot that many receptions with dance parties, but I do feel like they're picking back up. And I know that you guys like talking about lighting because you guys are like little lighting nerds like me. So we're going to talk a little bit more about using flash versus ambient, but mostly I'm just going to be showing you specifically how I edit reception photos. So let's jump right in. I will preface all of my editing with saying I don't use different presets for different times of the day. I have one preset that's applied to all of my images and I tweak it from there. My main goal is for me to recreate how the wedding day felt. So if I'm shooting ambient lighting or flash during the reception, I am going to keep some of the warmth in editing, but my goal is for it to feel consistent with the rest of the day, even if it isn't a perfect match. It's sort of like an interpretation of the feeling of the lighting on the day, and it sounds really like whatever, but I'll show you examples and we'll get into it. So this is what it looks like when I was using a flash at this wedding where I was shooting candids. This is what it looks like when the flash properly fired. This is what it looks like when the flash did not fire. For most of 2019, I had a faulty flash, but my flash was just kind of broken, like it would just randomly not fire. I've got a new flash since, but there were a lot of times where it just didn't fire because it was broken. But I'm going to show you how I would edit these two images to look consistent, because the entire thing that I want is to create like a cohesive feeling on the wedding day that's not jarring. I am going to, first of all, I'm going to fix this crop. It's not good. I use keyboard shortcuts for everything. By hitting O when I'm in crop mode, I can change the way that my crop looks. I'm going to keep the diamond and change my crop so it's a little bit nicer. There we go. And my goal is to have these two images look the same in the end so that they don't know that I just had a faulty flash. That's the goal. Trick your clients. So you can do it by doing reference view. Say I had this one edited the way that I wanted. I could drop this one over here and edit to try to make it look right. And I don't think that that's a bad way of going about things, but the way that I tend to do this is I have Stickies open. So Stickies on your Mac is just an app that's been around since the dawn of time, and you can set it up so that it floats over your window. And what I have here is just a document that has a bunch of different lighting situations with a bunch of different skin tones in it, and I have some reception ambient lighting, and I have some reception flash lighting, and a couple different situations where I'm trying to match the lighting. So this, instead of using the like reference active review, I can just edit my images comparing them to my stickies. And this is really helpful specifically if you have a client that was wearing a specific color dress or suit, so that way you can make sure that you're trying to get the colors consistent the entire time. But I like to use it for referencing lighting. So I'm going to start with the flash one because this actually isn't edited. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the exposure just a little bit. You can see that the floors are very green. I'm going to see what happens when I add pink. You can see that whenever the floors look the correct color, their skin is very pink. I love this venue, but they have fluorescent lighting and it's frustrating, and I could use green gels, but I never do because the bounce flash is already kind of tricky in there because you can see that the ceiling is black. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my color and I'm just going to make my yellows more orange. And I'm going to actually desaturate them a little bit more. Yep. So as long as I'm keeping skin tones like within a normal range, I will do very weird things to my HSLs. Bring down my highlights a little bit to bring back a little bit more of the detail in her dress. Bring up the exposure just a bit. His suit is still a little bit too warm, so I'm going to cool down this image a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more green now that we've fixed some of the flooring. And I might increase the contrast just a bit. I'm going to bring my highlights down all the way, and I might actually bring up the shadows. So this is the before, this is the after, and I can actually see this straight out of camera too. So this is it totally zeroed out. I blew out this image a little bit, but my flash wasn't firing, so I was trying to strike a balance between like this will look decent in ambient, and also this is fine with flash. So this is what it looks like with flash. I'm still not happy with those yellows. I'm going to go back into my colors and I'm going to just take my yellows out. all the way, and I'm fine with it. If you have ever used my presets, then you know that like I'm very comfortable with like desaturating a lot. I'm gonna add it back in a little bit, but I feel like that looks pretty good. It's not too far off from what it originally looked like. I'm trying not to like flip back and forth too much and just like use my reference images, but this is the before, this is the after. This is probably how I would edit this image. But when I flip to ambient, if I were to hit previous, it's not what it needs to be. I might use this as a base and bring up my exposure, but it's just not looking great. So I am going to go back to the preset that I started with. I'm gonna recrop. I'm just going to use my color picker and pick a neutral target. This area kind of looks like it's going to be pretty neutral. It actually did a pretty good job. I'm going to bring up my exposure a little bit more. So I'm just going to bring down the contrast. So this is what it looks like with the contrast up. I'm going to soften it a little bit because that highlight on her is really sharp. And I'm going to warm it up a little. And then I'm going to go back to the other one just to compare. So I wouldn't say that it's perfect. I might add a little bit more green to this one and warm it up. It's definitely not perfect, but they still feel like they live in the same universe, and so I would be comfortable with that. And I mentioned that I don't use special presets for the reception, but I do have special tools that I'll use. I have this one called Radial Dance Floor, where it literally just adds a little bit of vignette around them, and I can show you what that looks like. That is not the gradient one, but the radial one. This is my settings on what these look like. But it's just a big old circle, and I feel like it helps to bring attention to people in the middle. This is especially helpful whenever you're using bounce flash. I feel like it isolates subjects a little bit more. So I'm gonna add my radial dance floor to this one. And I just wanna take a minute to talk about the lighting at this reception. So you can see coming from behind her is a pretty strong light. That is not my light. It was a videographer's light. It was a painful LED blue. It was so bright, and the couple asked him if he could turn it off, and he said, no, nothing will turn out. It'll be totally dark. It wasn't that dark in there, but I don't know if he just didn't know what he was doing, but I was like, do you have gels for it, man? Like, is there anything you could do? I was literally having to shoot based on where that light was because I had to shoot into it because I wasn't able to cancel it out. So it was an interesting time shooting on the dance floor. This one specifically was actually lit by his light. So you can see what a difference in color his light was to the ambient light. This looks super, super dark orange, almost red compared to his very blue light. So straight out of camera, this was the color temperature of the light that he was bringing into the space. The way that I was able to edit this was just by warming it up just as much as I could. And it did make the background go a little funny, so I would just go into my color. And my go-to is to take out the yellows to see what that does. Sometimes I end up desaturating the oranges, which sucks because it messes with skin tones more than anything else. And then I'm going to take down some of the contrast. If I had more choice over the lighting, I would have done something different, but he had this giant bright beam. So my goal then became to just try to match it to the other lighting that was happening on the dance floor. So we can see here it's a little bit pink, so I'm going to add a little bit of green to it. And then these look pretty cohesive, even though this was no flash with his strong light. This was using my bounce flash, and this was also using bounce flash. This picture is just to show you the setup of what the room looks like. You can see that there's a bunch of weird things for me to bounce off in this room, but it was also dark, so sometimes my flash would go into a corner that was just dead, like it didn't bounce light back. This is what it looks like with ambient light. It was really pretty because they had some string lights, but there were also like random spotlights around, and they also had those little like downward lights. Whenever I was shooting this is kind of over by where the dance floor is. There were pretty intense spotlights that I had to fight against. So for the most part with this wedding, I ended up shooting with direct flash. So this was another situation where I was definitely using the radial dance floor. You can see it's not even like applying because it's definitely already on this image. I always use the radial dance floor, especially whenever I'm using bounce flash. It adds just a little bit more of isolation to that light, so it really looks like it was taken with like a pretty powerful, like, I don't know, snoot, or like with a flash that's really, really zoomed in. But I will almost always use Radial Dance Floor anytime I've been using direct flash. Another thing that I like about shooting direct flash is that you don't have to do a ton of editing. Like, I'm gonna reset this image. This is my base preset. I think all I did was take the contrast down. I might have taken the highlights down a little bit and then raised the exposure and added the Radial Dance Floor. So I would be pretty happy with this. One of the reasons why I keep talking about like how I lit it and why I was thinking about lighting and not just editing is because we save ourselves so much time in editing by getting the lighting right on the day. This is one wedding where the barn was bright orange, like there were warm lights inside, but also the color of the barn was like this yellowy orange color, and the light that was coming in from the windows was this bright blue. So you can see all the like blue highlights. You can also see that it turned everybody's faces sort of like orange and blue. So like the tip of her nose is blue here. It also made everybody look weirdly reddish pink. And I can try to compensate that by adding a little bit of green to my tint, but I still feel like it's not as nice. Here's another one where their tops of their heads are just orange, and anywhere that there's shadow, it's just orange, and it's just not the most flattering. So I will usually not use flash unless I'm shooting like dance floor stuff, and if I can use ambient light, that I will. But this is one reception where I ended up using flash for almost all of the cocktail hour and reception. But you can see how much nicer this is. I was just bouncing off of the orange walls, and I can tell you that made it very hard to edit. So this is what it looked like when I bounced my regular flash off of these orange walls. This was the color that was hitting them and coming out. So I'm just gonna grab my color picker. You can do this, the shortcut, you can do this by grabbing it over here, or you can hit W. I'm gonna pick a neutral target right there on a dress. It's a little bit cooler than what I would like it to be if we're looking at these samples. So I'm just gonna warm up my temperature a little bit, and I'm actually happy with that. One thing that I could do is go in and take away a little bit of the yellow if I wanted, just because the uplighting on the wall, but it doesn't look that bad to me. And this looks infinitely nicer to me than this. If we wanted to try to work with these a little bit more, let's try to warm it up. I'm actually gonna put these side by side. Let's see, I am going to warm it up a little bit more. And then she's wearing a blue dress, so it's not a situation where I can just remove the blue, but I might be able to take away some of the yellow or add a little bit of warmth to the yellow. I don't know if that's working. A lot of it is just playing with it and see how it goes. Sometimes just desaturating all of the colors can make it look more normal, just because it's like unifying them a little bit more. Here, I'm gonna play with the cyan to see if that does much. See, it's not doing much. I might play with the reds. So you can see a lot of it is kind of trial and error. I'm gonna sort of add a little bit more blue to the reds, see what that does. Desaturate the reds a little bit. Make it a little bit darker. And I'm gonna take the orange, bring it down a little bit. I'm going to go into split toning, and then I'm gonna add some blues to the shadows. Our main problem here is that we have oranges coming in the shadows. So I'm gonna add some blue. That looks like an appropriate color blue. I'm gonna add a little bit more saturation, and then I'm just gonna play with the balance because I only want it to be in like the darkest of shadows. So let's see. I feel like that looks fairly balanced. And then we can sort of see the before and after. And then compare it to this image. It's a little bit closer. It's definitely less saturated. We're getting more saturation whenever I'm able to use flash. If I wanted to make them consistent, then I might want to go into some of the images where I was using flash and take out some of the contrast so that it would match this a little bit. But overall, I feel like these two images are edited consistently enough that I feel pretty good about it. There are a lot of situations where contrast makes the biggest difference in the lighting and the overall look and tone of the image. This image is kind of whatever, but whenever I take out the contrast, it removes the drama that exists between the sky and the lights from below. It sort of evens everything out, and it looks more like how we see things. Like whenever we are looking at a sunset, it doesn't get all blown out for us if we're looking at the horizon line, or vice versa. Like whenever we're looking at the sunset, the horizon line isn't dark. So by taking the contrast down a lot on situations where you're using ambient light and there's sort of a stark contrast between different lighting situations, I could probably still like lower my highlights and raise my shadows a little bit more just to get an even softer. I know it's sort of like almost HDR, but I like this look, and I'm going to get another added level of consistency over this whenever I take it into alien skin later, which is how I finish all my images. In the future, at some point, I am going to have you guys email me your trickiest reception photos just for me to do an edit of them. I've definitely done this for some of you whenever I've done one-on-one mentorships. I'm happy to do it. Shooting with tricky DJ lighting is not fun, and I think a lot of it is preventable with lighting, but I'm not always able to cancel out all the DJ lights. In some situations, I just let the DJ lights be. It's adding whatever lighting it's adding to the image, and that's kind of how they're gonna remember it, and I'm not gonna worry about it. But if I wanted to try to tone it down a little bit, then I'm gonna start by trying to get their skin tones normal, because first and foremost, I think that's the thing that's sticking out. So I'm gonna add a lot of tint. I'm going to add a lot of green. I'm going to warm it up ever so slightly. There's a bright blue color. I'm going to address the bright blue elephant in the room. Try to take that down. I'm going to go into cyan. See about that. Remove that. He has a pink cast on his shirt. I'm going to see if that's coming from magenta. A little bit. Little bit. I'm going to take the orange and I'm going to see if making it more red does anything. It does a little bit. I'm just going to straight up desaturate. I don't know. I'm going to go into yellows. I'm going to make those more orange because right now they're kind of green because we added a lot of green whenever we were trying to adjust to make skin tones normal. And take some of the saturation out. Now that I have desaturated quite a bit, I'm going to go back into my basic and just add a little bit more green to the skin tones and warm it up a little bit. So I might just grab the gradient tool, decrease the exposure a little bit, warm it up a little bit, and just add some warmth to the bottom of the screen and a little bit of pink. Just a bit. Here we go. So, add a little bit more green, warm it up. So the colors are not perfect. That is what we started with. So getting from that to that, it's more normal. Ideally, that's not the situation that you're working with where you're trying to completely cancel out the lighting. I think whenever I ended up delivering this, I definitely delivered something that was closer to being like bright bluish pink. But this is as close as we were able to get it, just using HSLs. So if you ever have a weird DJ light where you're like, I really want to deliver this, but I don't want people to know that it was like a rave, use your HSLs. I have another example where I'm going to show you where I was bouncing flash versus the ambient light and how I got to match the two so they look pretty similar. I am literally going to start just by doing a color picker and dropping from our dress. I'm actually very happy that we have clients that wear white a lot of the time because that kind of makes color balancing really easy. I've done that. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the contrast on this. It's a little bit more contrasty than I would like. I'm going to bump up the exposure. It's a little bit cooler than what I would like compared to my samples over here. I'm going to increase the temperature. I like that. I do like to keep things a little bit warmer than even maybe they feel. And if I'm not mistaken, I might have been using gels at this wedding, but I can't confirm that because this is from April of 2019 and I don't remember, but it does look like it because this room tends to, like those lights behind them tend to be really, really orange, and this lighting is overall pretty consistent. So I feel pretty good about this. She's maybe a little pink, so I'm gonna make it 15 instead of 17. And then if I take those settings and I go to this and I hit previous, it's not gonna work. And see how orange the room is now. But I am going to add my preset called ISO 6400, which is just gonna add a little bit of smoothing. See how grainy this is? I'm gonna add my ISO 6400, which is just a general smoothing to this. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna grab my eyedropper or hit W and grab our dress. That made it very green. It's not what I wanted. So I'm just going to poke around on the image and see if I can get something normal somewhere else. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to warm it up a little bit because the room was really warm and that's probably how they're going to remember it. add a little bit of pink, and then I'm going to compare these two. And yeah, those look pretty good. They look like they were basically in the same family. This doesn't have a lot of extreme lighting. Nothing serious was going on. Whenever I adjusted the skin tones, everything else in the room tended to sort of stay the same. So this one was super easy to edit. One thing that sort of bugs me about my own images whenever I've shot ambient, which I did on this image, and flash, which I did on this one, is even though I can get the editing to look pretty similar with white balance, there's still going to be some areas where it's just going to be like neon yellow in the background because I didn't use gels. So again, I'm going to go into color and I'm just going to take out those yellows and see what that does. It helps a little bit. I might bring my oranges down just a hair. It doesn't appear to be affecting skin tones in a super dramatic way, but I'm going to take my reds and lower them just a little bit to make sure that they still look like people and not like zombies. So now I have those two images, and they roughly look like they were taken in the same universe. I might cool this one down a little bit and add a little bit more pink. Yeah, I like those. Those are good. I don't always edit in library mode too much, but sometimes I do. Here's an example where I was using a flash for some of the speeches, and then I was not using flash during other times of the speeches. And the difference in lighting is insane. I'm going to try to get these to match, and I'm going to do it side by side in library mode. So let's just do, let's see, triple temperature. I'm going to bring up the exposure a lot. That turns her pretty neon. Let's take some of the exposure out. I'm going to add a little bit of pink. Nope, mistake. Add some contrast. I'm going to bring the shadows down. Might take some of the warmth out. I might go back to this image and take some of the warmth out too. And his suit is not meant to be blue. We can see that it's not meant to be blue here. So I feel pretty comfortable going into develop, bringing down the blue here, subtracting it. I'm going to increase the saturation here and just try to make it look more similar to this image. So I'm going to take out the yellow. I'm going to bring the luminance down just a hair. I'm going to add just a tiny bit more pink. Her dress is so much more pink in the other image. I'm going to take out some more blue. Because he's being backlit by the videographer's ungelled video lights, there's a pretty significant difference between these two images. I'm going to add a little bit more contrast. His skin is just so pink here. Let's see what this does. Oh, this does a little bit of something. There's some purples in there that I don't think need to be there. So I'm going to take out some purple and take out some magenta, even though there isn't a lot there. I might play with the oranges to see if I can get them to be a little bit more pink and then take them out. And then I'm going to overall add some green tint. Cool. I think that that is a lot closer. It's still not entirely perfect, but the lighting was very, very different between the two. Here's another example where it's just bounce flash. All I really want to do here is reduce the highlights that we're getting a little bit more of the detailing back on her dress. I'm going to take out some of the warmth. And all I want to do is make her skin tone be a little bit closer to the examples that I have here. So I'm going to warm it up a little bit. I'm going to take out some of the contrast. Maybe bring down the exposure just a hair. And I'm okay with all the colors here. I don't think that I need to necessarily take out any yellows. I think it looks pretty similar to my examples. And I do have a picture that was taken with ambient lighting later. They blew up lighting at this wedding, so I'm just going to try to make this one look similar to the other one. I'm going to start by adding quite a bit of warmth. Just trying to make their skin tones look more normal. And normal for me isn't necessarily like, that looks normal. It's more like, there's no blue. Like for me, normal is just like getting rid of all the blue. So I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit, decrease the contrast. Let's see, go back and forth. Now that I've warmed it up, I like their skin tones, but it feels too warm in different places. So I'm going to see about removing some of the yellow. That only really removes it from the green. So I'm going to take some of the orange and just bring that down. So by just removing some of the orange, we're keeping the other colors okay. There was just entirely too much warmth in that image. So now if I compare the two, They feel similar. I would say this one maybe needs to be a bit pinker to match, but I am happy with those. I feel like they exist in the same universe, which is a thing that I keep saying, but it's what I'm looking for whenever I'm editing. I really just want something that feels like it was taken by the same person. I really want it to feel consistent. I don't want it to be jarring as somebody's going through their wedding album, like, oh, and that's where we started dancing, and you know, because the lighting totally shifted. And some of these are examples that you guys have seen before in my bounce flash tutorial. This was an image from my bounce flash tutorial, as well as this one. These were both taken in the same space. One was using flash and one was not using flash. So the way that I edit them is the same techniques that I've been using in this entire video. I just bring them up, I compare them, and then I sync the ones that were similarly lit with the same setting. Here's an example where I was using flash, and here's an example where the flash did not fire. So we can go in and edit this one and try to match the other one. I'm going to pick her dress. I'm going to crop it. It's a little bit like whenever I'm using flash, it looks so much softer. So the first thing I'm going to do is take out some of the contrast, brighten it so that it's similar. It's way pinker, so I'm going to add a lot more pink. I'm going to warm it up a little bit more, bring up the exposure. I'm going to make it bigger. Is that helpful? I think that's helpful. Warm it up a little bit more. These look like they were similarly lit, even though the flash did not fire in this one, which is why it was so blue, and the flash did fire in this one. So I feel really happy with the look of those two. The only thing that I might do to this one is I might add my dance floor, and I'm going to add my ISO 6400. Almost always the reception photos take the longest for me to edit. Whenever I was outsourcing, I would literally sometimes just send the reception photos just because it takes forever. But it's usually because of things that I've done. Here's a situation where I was just trying to take a bunch of pictures. She said that her dad never dances, and he was finally on the dance floor, and I was so excited. I just took a bunch of pictures, and my flash needed to recharge, and I was like, no, let's keep going. So here's one where the flash did fire, and here's one where it did not. So let's edit those. First thing, I need to reduce the exposure on this one. I'm going to take the contrast down. I'm going to add my ISO 6400 because it was way too high here. And I'm going to warm it up just a little bit. Decrease the exposure a little bit. See how there's sort of like green in her dress pants? I'm going to take just the green, and I'm literally going to remove the green. I might also go into split toning and add a little bit more warmth to the shadows. So I'm only turning it up so that I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm decreasing the saturation, and then I'm going to move it so it's just happening in the shadows. So I'm going to turn that up a little bit more. Only in the shadows. That looks pretty good. And so that is getting rid of some of the green that's happening there. I'm going to add just a tiny bit more pink and warm it up a little bit. And I'm going to work on this image. So this one, compared to the other one, is very much more contrasty. So I'm going to take out some of the contrast. I'm going to bring up the brightness a little bit. And I really want these two to look similar. So I need to add some pink so that the vest is a more similar color. And his skin tone here is quite a bit more orange. So I might go back and develop and go to my colors, go to my reds, and just add some orange to my reds. How's that? It's not doing anything. So I'm going to go to my orange, and I'm going to add some yellow to my oranges, and then just desaturate just a bit. That actually looks pretty close. I'm definitely not going to get a perfect mix between these two just because the lighting was so different, but that is something where I feel pretty comfortable. They're in the same universe and I'm happy. And again, whenever I put alien skin on them, it's gonna be nice. So I'm definitely gonna have you guys send me some images soon for me to do an edit on to show you what I would do. But for the most part, when it comes to DJ lighting, you really have to find a sweet spot. This is ambient lighting where I was shooting like next to the DJ lights, so that you can see that the DJ lights are here. Here's where I was getting kind of like further off to the side so I can start to cancel it out. The ideal situation is shooting into the DJ lighting a little bit to use them as sort of accents as much as possible. You can kind of shoot off to the side, but you definitely have to find a sweet spot. There isn't going to be a great way to edit this image. It's really just about finding where you're standing, and no amount of editing can fix that. The biggest takeaway that I have whenever it comes to editing for reception is just to use sample images. Make sure that you have a bunch of different lighting situations for you to actively reference as you're editing different parts of the day. They don't all have to be perfectly consistent in my mind. They just have to feel the way that it felt whenever they were getting married. They don't have to be perfectly consistent throughout the day, but I do recommend that you make sure that you're trying to match their skin tones as much as possible and keep the lighting more flattering. So this is the last one that I'm going to edit, I promise. I'm just going to crop this. use her dress to pick a color. I'm going to brighten this up a little bit. I'm going to bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows a little bit. Oh, that's doing weird things to her hair. I'm going to bring the shadows back down. Bring down the exposure, decrease contrast a little bit. Here, his suit is not supposed to be blue. We just have some window lighting coming in. So I'm just going to take the blue and I'm just going to take it out. And I'm okay with that. Popcorn thinks it's a problem. He clearly has ideas about it. I'm going to go into the cyans and see if there's anything left over. She has a green dress in the background, so I'm actually going to leave it. I might take out some of the yellows just because we have very neon colors happening here. So I'm going to take out some of the yellows. I might take out a little bit of the oranges. If I was really dedicated to the cause, I would grab one of these gradients and I would reduce the temperature and just draw like this. I'm not typically like that picky about stuff, but it's an option. So I hope this is helpful. Hopefully you don't have too many big dance parties happening because it's a pandemic. Or if you do, you are being safe and wearing N95s because people are not wearing masks at any of the weddings that I'm shooting. Well, I look forward to seeing some of your reception photos soon because I'm definitely going to be asking for those because I think that's a really fun idea that we should do together. And yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay,